All right, let's go ahead and get started. And I want to just, for the group that was in here with me, thank you so much for the discussion, for what you shared. Brother Harlan said that you also had a great discussion back there as well. And that's the thing about learning how to communicate, learning, sharing, realizing that there are other people in your situation. The circumstances may not be exactly the same, but the bigger concepts are the same. What we're facing is the same. Some of the unique challenges and the unique stressors in relationships. Now, so my topic, session 5, and look, we're at session 5. We only got to go through 7, so we're making really good progress here.
8.
Well, 8's question and answer.
Oh, okay.
So it's not really a full session. But, oh, by the way, my wife told me, see, this is one of the things you forget, right? She said, if you have specific questions that you want us to answer at the end, just text them into that service. And they're completely private. I don't see them. We don't know who sent them in. And so we're willing to answer just about any question.
Is that working okay for everybody? Is that working? Okay.
Yeah. So, I want to start out this session by saying, opposites attract. You ever heard that statement? Yes. So how many of you in your primary relationship, when you first got married, felt like the person you married was the opposite of you? Yeah. I do feel that way. I'll explain my situation. As they say, I went from mom to the Marine Corps to a wife. So I was living at home. I was attending college. Decided to enlist in the Marine Corps, and I went straight from my home to boot camp. I went from boot camp to my primary school in Millington, Tennessee, where I met my wife. And 4 weeks later, well, we met on right around Valentine's Day. We got married in July. So it was 4 months. I said 4 weeks. It was about 4 months. I got married. And we got married, and then a week later, we left Millington, Tennessee. My point is, I never lived on my own, ever. Whereas my wife, she was a worldly woman. In the sense that I knew I'd get her. In the sense that she went to college, she lived on her own, right? She had her own place, she cooked her own meals. I had never cooked my own meal. True statement. My mom cooked, right? And then the Marine Corps cooked. And then now I want to rest assured I can cook my own meal now. But we were opposites. She was very independent. I was very dependent. We were opposite in that regard. Do you think that ever caused issues in our marriage? Yeah, initially I couldn't. I mean, I'm the let me show you a lot of love kind of guy. Hug you, right? Snuggle, and she's like, whoa, I need my space, Tom. We were very different. It did cause some issues. So, oftentimes what we have to realize is that those differences, those things that attract us to other people can sometimes be the very things that drive us away as well. That's where we have to realize, communicate, recognize. All right, so we sent out a text at 8:30 this morning. And the question was, what do you think is the biggest issue in marriage today? Or where do you think people struggle the most in relationships? Got several answers. I'm going to break the news to you. The number one answer was by far the number one answer. Anybody want to know? Shout out what it was? Money. Absolutely. So we're going to talk about, I have a top 10 list. We're going to focus. We're going to go through all 10, but we're not going to, again, you can spend, matter of fact, I demonstrated this during our association meeting when I gave a preview of this, and I talked about one of these at length that I'm not even going to really touch on as much today. So you can take a good pastor, which I know Brother Harlan is, can take each one of these, teach for weeks and weeks and weeks on each topic because there's so much good information out there. But before I did that, I went out, I did a Google search, and I said, show me the top 10 issues in marriage. So here's some of them. I just want you to read this. Patience, right? It takes my husband longer to choose a rental car online than it did for us to choose the names of our sons. Here's another one. Marriage is an endless cycle of love, right? Trying to understand each other, seeing who can withstand their overflowing trash cans longer. Anybody ever been there? Yeah? Have you ever just kind of just like in the kitchen, just kind of pushed it down a little bit more, and knowing that she's going to cook dinner in 20 minutes and she's going to add more trash and she'll end up having to take it out? I've never done that, by the way. All right, sometimes I ask my husband if he notices anything different about me just to watch him panic and lie. Yeah, there are some, the question that I dread the most, what do you think of my outfit? Is there a right or wrong answer to that?
Oh, there's a wrong.
Yes! Yes, and now my wife trusts me, and I appreciate that. But sometimes, you know that she's put something on and she really likes it. And they're like, it ain't working for me, but hey, I don't have to wear it. But I do the same thing. It's the opposite as well, right? It is the opposite. All right, problem solving. If Medusa was married, her husband would pull dead snakes from the drain every day while she continually brought up the one time he left the toilet seat up. That, you know what, I don't have hair, obviously, right? So, and I will tell you, I fight this, especially when my daughter lived at home and I had two of them with long hair. I fought this issue a lot. Happens.
How about the other issue, the toilet seat?
Never happens.
I don't know how many times I've got up in the night and wound up sitting in
Night lights are a good thing for marriages. All right. Here's this one. Me watching my husband quietly close the dishwasher after taking just one clean dish out. You guys ever do that? Just, you like, this is a true, I'll tell myself, true story. We have a dishwasher, right? She runs the dishwasher. I eat food or lunch or whatever. I walk in and, I open up that dishwasher to put my dish in. If there's a little bit of steam coming out, I know it's on that auto dry cycle. I'm like, yes, in the sink it goes. We're all guilty of these things, right? Here's another one, priorities. Watching as my wife throws out a box of mismatched cords. How many of you have that, right? She doesn't understand. Why do I have a drawer full of cords in my office. She doesn't understand that printer cord that I will never use again, I might need that someday.
Amen.
Exactly. All right. Communication. My wife messaged me from the shopping mall to ask if I think she looks fat. I was typing no, and an autocorrect changed to moo. So long story short, I'm going to come over and stay at your place for a while. Yeah. All right. So, let's talk about my list of top 10. Those are fun. And you know, it's very interesting. One of the things, so I'm a big proponent that social media should be used for good things. Those are fun, right? You can go out there and you go on Twitter, Facebook, you can search for those. They're all in the public domain. They're fun. But there are some real issues in marriage that we want to talk about. And so I've got a top 10 list. I'm going to go through them. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the last 4. And I'm actually going to spend the most, as far as equally, I'm going to spend the most time talking about money today. But let's talk about some of these. So changing ambitions. What do I mean by changing ambitions, right? Career or outside interests become higher priority than marriage. So I want you to think of, so when you think about career, when you think about careers, look, we all have to work. I get that. We all have to, earn a living so that we can support ourselves. But how many times have we seen people forsake their family for the purposes of trying to get ahead in their career? Or, and no offense to the hunters out there, because I attempt to be one, right? But how many of us, if we allowed ourselves, could be all consumed by hunting, or all consumed by a habit or a activity, right? The thing is that when we think about these, and again, I'm not picking on anybody. I don't think that I know of anybody that's consumed, but you think and spread that out. Most of the times, when people decide to get married, they are most likely to have discussed wants, desires for the future. I want maybe to own a home. I want to have a family, right? That said, sometimes some of the issues that come up between spouses is the concept or the idea that one of both partners choose to change their minds and they come up with new plans, new thoughts. I've really made 3 big moves in my life. The first big move that I made in my life was from California to Oregon. I came home one day after the Rodney King riots, if you guys remember those. And I said to my wife, and says, "We're moving." And she was like, "Oh, where are we moving to?" I said, "We're going to Oregon." She's like, "Yes, all right, let's go." I decided I didn't want to raise my family in California. The second move that I made was from Oregon to Idaho, right? Now, that move was for the right reasons. That was to go pastor a church. And then the third move I made was from Idaho to Oregon. And that was the right move. That was because this is where God wanted me. But, I didn't necessarily change my ambitions, but our plans changed. And the move to Idaho, we were in lockstep. The move back, not quite so much. We got there, right? But it did put some stress on our relationship. It did put some pressure, because at the time that we moved from, and let me just be very, very clear, my wife is my best supporter in my ministry. And I think you all know how I feel about my wife. My wife was also an awesome mother. And so she knew that taking a boy and a girl that were in middle school in an environment where they grew up in and that's all they knew, and moving them was going to be hard. Because she experienced that in her life. Point is that all these things can bring about stress within a marriage. All right, overstepping boundaries, right? So this idea of overstepping boundaries, this is the one that I actually presented at the state meeting. So for those of you that were there, you might remember it. For those that weren't, let me just remind you, this is the idea of I'm going to change you no matter what. I want to change how you dress. I want to change how you eat. I want to change your habits. I want to change who you are. I'm going to make you conform to my ideal person. And that's where we have to be really careful, right? We find that it's not uncommon for one spouse to try to change their partner. Again, whether it's fashion sense or fundamental beliefs, it will feel like a personal invasion. And it will have an impact on the relationship. Sometimes it's done on purpose, and sometimes it's done unawares. We just don't realize it. Unintentionally overstepping personal boundaries can happen as well. And so we have to really consider why we're saying things. Why are we asking? Why are we doing? Right? All right. Taking your mate for granted. When spouses stop acknowledging one another's efforts or fail to express gratitude for loving gestures. Brother Jeff talked about this in his section about women desiring to be loved, the expression of love. Men desiring respect, right? And we have to be careful that we don't overlook the fact it's those little gestures, those little things, those little statements, those little notes, those little, outpouring or outshowing of that gratitude and that respect that helps to continuously make that relationship strong and to grow and to be vibrant. What happens when we take our mate for granted is that we then, you ever heard that saying, death by 1,000 cuts? You know, I did this, and she didn't acknowledge that. I did this, and he didn't recognize that I did that, and I did it for him, right? It's important that we don't take them for granted. It's important that we recognize, and I think it's important that we acknowledge them as well, because by acknowledging them, we are reinforcing our love and respect for one another. By not acknowledging them, we are just taking them just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. It's like that situation where you ever have a relationship where you feel like you're doing all the giving and the other person is doing all the taking? Those are challenging relationships. They're hard on us, right? So we don't want our mate to feel that way. We want them to know that we appreciate them. All right, number 7, anger. Explosive outbursts of or fits of rage. You know, it's normal. I want to be clear. It is normal for a husband or a wife to get angry. How many of you have never been angry with your loved one or with your children, whoever, right? We all get angry from time to time. But it's how we react to that feeling of anger that truly will define us in our relationship. And not only individually, but in a relationship. And this doesn't matter. And this idea of outbursts and fits of anger can be with your wife or your husband. It could be with your children. It could be with your neighbor. I had a neighbor come over one day and just had a big old fit of anger. She was mad at us, walked in our house and started yelling at us. And my neighbor's son had to physically pick her up and carry her out of my house. She was mad that I had cut down a tree on my property, which she thought was her property. And I had clearly had it surveyed and built a retaining wall, and it was one of those blooming plum trees that do nothing but make a big mess anyway, right? Anyway, I could have compounded the issue by yelling and screaming back at her. What I did is I allowed her son to handle it, right? That's not to say that I've never gotten angry with my neighbor, but it's, again, how we react in adverse situations. Within marriage or any relationship, anger, why do we get angry? Anybody know what's the number one reason of anger? Internally, it's because we are defensive by nature. Now, hurt, yes, hurt causes anger, but the reason that anger comes to the forefront primarily is because we are defensive. I'm going to defend me. I'm going to defend my ground. I'm going to defend my family. I'm going to defend my belief, whatever it is. And when you oppose that, I feel like you're attacking me, and therefore I'm going to allow that anger to rise up within me. We need to learn to maintain a sense of calmness. We need to also learn how to consider one another's feelings, right? As we talked about, it's important to openly listen and express our thoughts. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to even have conflict, and again, that'll be more, some really good conflict stuff will be talked about in the next session. It's okay to have conflict. It's how you react to that conflict is really what's going to determine the success or failure of any relationship. Selfishness. I think we all understand this concept of selfishness. In mild forms, it can be seen as a lack of consideration and respect, or let me change that, it could be seen as a lack of love or respect. Love for women, respect for men. At its worst, selfishness is controlling. It's very, very manipulating. It manifests itself in jealousy. And we find that it can even progress to abuse. We want to, if one spouse if one spouse or the other spouse acts selfishly, and they consistently place their needs and desires and wants above and ahead of their spouses or ahead of someone else in their relationship. You ever have a friend who's just acquaintance and they say, you know what? They always say, let's go out to dinner, but I'm going to choose where we go. What are they doing? They're being controlling. They're not considering the needs of someone else. Again, very, very different and very challenging. We need to realize that it can lead to some very destructive behavior. And I know I've kind of gone through these a little bit faster, but I do because I want to get to the top 4 here. Technology. This is one that I actually feel very passionate about, and it's technology interference. How many of you, and you don't have to raise your hand, but how many of you sit down at dinner with your phone? No, we have a rule in our house, and it doesn't matter who's over. When you come to the dinner table, phones don't come with you. Now, you can have them in your pocket because obviously there are emergencies out there that may have to be dealt with, right? How many of you, and this is where sometimes we do get guilty, right? How many of you have the TV on, sitting next to your spouse with the TV on, and all of a sudden you're here, texting, chatting, scrolling, hopefully up and not right or left, right? And then your spouse is over here and he or she is doing this, or you see groups of kids walking down the street and they're called the technology zombies, right? What's happening?
There's no interaction.
There's no interaction. There is no interaction. And look, technology is a wonderful thing. There's more information on this device, which is just an iPad, than I had in my school, the whole school, when I was going through high school. Maybe even through college. It is amazing the access that we have. And access is a good thing. I will tell you that how many of you have ever said, I don't really know how to do that. Hey, let me go YouTube that. A lot. Home ownership has gotten a lot easier with YouTube. I was struggling with a thing on my Jeep, and I was like, I just can't figure this out. So I went on to YouTube and I figured, technology is a good thing. But there's a couple of problems with technology. One, it's an addiction. We must realize that technology is as big of an addiction as drugs or alcohol can be. Second thing about it is that just the technology in and of itself, it is amazing watching Riley. Now, she's innocent. I'm not saying she's addicted to technology, but she'll be playing with her toy, but if Grandma sits her phone just sits it on the ground, man, she makes a beeline. It's like Maddie made the comment. I don't know why we're very careful not to be on our phones around here a lot, and yet so it's the technology. The other thing about the technology, it's what's available on the technology, right? I mentioned this yesterday, and number 2 on my list is intimacy. But technology has perverted the concept of intimacy, and it has changed expectations. It has changed privacy. It has changed modesty, right? And and that intimacy that we experience, technology has a direct impact on that. It used to be, how many of you can, I know for some of you, we're really going to date ourselves because I don't even remember this, but how many of you remember watching TV when the husband and wife weren't even allowed to sleep in the same bed? Right? And then, I mean, what changed? Technology changed, right? But so has perception. Technology does a lot of things for us. Good, it does some things that are really bad for us as well. Let me just say this. Make sure that you look, we all use it. I'm tethered to my phone, unfortunately, because of work. Matter of fact, there are weeks when I'm on call 24 hours a day and I have to be available. Guess what? I have to have that cell phone. I have to stay in cell phone range. That's just the nature of my job. But don't let technology define us. Now, that's not just a phone. It's what do you post on social media? What are you willing to share? I saw some memes the other day. I thought about putting one in here, but I decided not to. But it's me in public versus me on social media. Do you have a different personality online? Are you willing to say things online that you're not willing to say in public? Are you willing to say things about the person that you love or the person that you are in a family member or a co-worker or a neighbor that you're not willing to say in public? You see, we get behind the technology. I'm sitting here and I may be sitting in my office at home. I can type whatever I want thinking I'm anonymous, right? But yet, once you put it out there, it's out there forever. You know, recently a comedian was fired by Saturday Night Live. And I don't know him. I don't watch Saturday Night Live. I'm usually in bed. It's too late on, right? But point is, he got fired because he said something 10 years ago. I think it was about an Asian person. The Prime Minister of Canada did something back in college that they found out about. And, you know, it's out there, folks. You can't say or do anything and put it on the social media and not think that somebody's not going to find it. Technology is a real disruptor. In my business, in my secular life, we tout the fact that we're a disruptor, but to business. But don't let technology be a disruptor in your life. It can easily consume you and ultimately destroy you. Oh, I did want to share one thing about it before I move on. I found this statistic and I thought it was fascinating. We spend 47 hours per week on some form of technology. 47 hours a week. Cell phone, tablet, PC. Yet we spend 7 minutes per day on average in meaningful conversation. 47 hours versus 7 minutes of meaningful conversation. That's a pretty big disparity. Think about that. All right, now, so top four. Top four, the first one is communication skills. Number 4 is communication skills, right? So, Proverbs 15:1 says, "A soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger." I like what Brother Jeff said. There were times when Sister Joyce would say, "Hey, can we talk?" And he was like, "Do we really have to?" You know, why is that? Well, I know sometimes it's because I remember coming home from work I've worked from home for the last 15 years, but there was a time when I actually had to get dressed and go to an office. Now, I do get dressed in the morning. I just don't have to leave the house to get to my office. But I would go to work, and I'd work for 8-10 hours a day or whatever it was, and I'd come home, and my wife would say, "Can I have an adult conversation with you?" And I'm like, "You got to give me 5 minutes." But because I needed to dump all my work stuff so that I could focus on what she was saying, she needed to dump all of the child babble so that she could have a meaningful adult conversation. How we communicate, when we communicate, All of these things are important, right? You know, talking, communicating, those are terms that are oftentimes used interchangeably. But it is important to understand that those terms do differ greatly from one another. So what is talking? Talking is about giving information without the need of a response. You ever have those types of talking discussions? Right? Talking is the need to give information without the need of a response. And it leaves plenty of room for complaining and criticism. You ever sit down and say, hey, we need to talk? We sit down, and the person says, I need to talk. And I say, okay. And they talk for 20 minutes, and I say, okay. And they say, so much better. And they leave, right? Did we really communicate, or I just listened to them? And that happens, right? That happens. So the difference is, that's talking. Well, so what is communication? Communication is a verbal or a nonverbal exchange of information that requires a response. You see, it takes more than one person to have, or one person to communicate. And it is truly and sincerely focused on a connection between people. If I were to sit down, my wife say, I'd like to talk, and I say, okay, and I actually used to do this, by the way. I was guilty of this. I said, hey, can we have a conversation? I'd be driving. I would spend 20 minutes telling her about all the things that's going on, because maybe I'm traveling for work. I tell her about my work meeting. I tell her about the hotel I was staying at. I make sure with what I'm having for dinner. I'm like, okay, thanks for talking with me. She finally said, you need to give me a chance to say something. You need to give me a chance to share something with you. If we're going to communicate effectively, I need to be able to share. And I need to be able to share without fear of reprisal, right? We can't communicate while we're distracted. Now, again, the computer, cell phones, things like that, right? But we actually need to make time. Yes, make a schedule. Schedule time to sit down and communicate, to share. And that's true in any relationship. Whether the relationship is with your spouse or your children or with your neighbor or whatever it is, if there is something to communicate, you need to schedule that. You need to sit down. You need to be open and honest and have that opportunity to exchange information and listen to the responses, right? So you need to make times, and we need to. There are certain phrases that I don't want to steal, but because again, I always have to be careful about not stepping on the next material. But there are some phrases. There are some ways to communicate, and Brother Harlan has some really good information on that. So I'm going to leave it at that. But the number 4 issue on the top 10 is communicate. Remember that a large part of communicating is listening. Be a good listener. Number 3 would be family. Parents, children, in-laws. How many of you have a really... No, I'm not going to ask that question. I don't want to know. I don't want to know the answer to that. So we saw this yesterday. Adam said, therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. You ever heard the statement that children are a blessing until they're not? Right? In my household, when the children were bad, it would be, your son. And when they got good stuff in school, guess what our children did? I did get half the credit for that, but I got all the credit when they were bad. We find that when kids struggle, it introduces stress between spouses. The thing that we have to realize is that children will exploit that. Children will do, and it starts at a very young age. Let me just tell you something, it doesn't stop when they get older. I have a 31-year-old and my oldest son is probably the worst about this. He'll come in and he'll say, Dad, can I have the leftovers? And I'm like, no, you can't have the leftovers. That's my lunch. And he'll go to Mom and say, Mom, on the sideboard, can I have leftovers? Oh, sure. I'll divide it up, right? He knows how to manipulate. Now that's an innocent thing, but that's a true thing that happens in our family. And then Travis finds out about it and says, wait a minute, where's mine? Kristen's always good. She's the good one. She knows how to make her own. That's the thing, right? She got all of mom's recipes. Children will exploit one parent over the other. You know, we talked about this. You have to have a plan in marriage. You have to have you know what? You may have to refine your plan. Why? Because situations change. My plan, if I were to sit down and write out a plan today, it would be quite different from the plan that I would have written out 33 years ago. 33 years ago, that plan would have included, some type of, security, right? In the sense of having a house, having a job, children. Now my plan's much different. My plan now is, how quickly can I retire, right? It's a different plan. And what does that mean for my wife and I? But you know what can disrupt that plan is children. I knew a man that adopted a girl and lost $70,000. Now I won't tell you all the circumstances behind it, but I'll just tell you, I guarantee you 3 years ago he would have never thought he'd be in that situation, and yet here he is today in that situation. Why? Because he adopted someone and they took advantage of him. Children can be a stressor in marriage, but not just children, parents. Parents, interference from in-laws. No, I will say this, that as in-laws go, I've got some good in-laws. They never interfere. My father-in-law, he's great. I get along really well with him. And I get along really well with my mother-in-law as well. I'm not sure if my wife would say the same, but I think you got along really good with my mom and my dad. The thing is that if we allow them to, if husbands or wives have not been fully emancipated from their parents, it will cause problems. Every time you have an issue in your marriage, you're running home to your mom or your dad and not sitting down and communicating with your spouse, not sitting down and talking, it will cause stress in a marriage. You see, we have to leave. Ephesians 5:31, it says, for this cause shall a man leave his father's mother and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. It's about being joined together. Make sure that you don't allow children, parents, or in-laws to come between you and your spouse or anything. So, intimacy. Let me read the 2 verses and then we'll talk about it. Marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled. 1 Corinthians 7:3-5. Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. Defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourself to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency. So, what is Paul saying? I'll tell you. Intimacy, sex, if you will, is enjoyable. God brought us together in part to enjoy one another. And what he says in 1 Corinthians there is that a wife should not deprive herself from her husband, and the husband should not deprive himself from his wife, except there be a valid reason for that. And obviously in this case it was for prayer and fasting. But also, as I said yesterday, you have to set the proper expectations. You have to, as much as we communicate about our children and we also need to communicate about intimacy. We need to talk about what our expectations are. We need to talk about what we're willing to do, what we're not willing to do. We need to understand that what we see on television and the expectation versus the reality of it, right? The expectation is what, the world thinks that projects, and that's not always reality. Intimacy will drive people away. It'll drive husbands away quicker than it will a wife. That's just fact. Now, it doesn't mean that wives don't cheat on their husbands, because they do. But remember the microwave and the slow cooker, right? You know, men are from 0 to 1,000 in about 3.8 seconds, and women are slow. And men, when they feel that, when men feel rejected, they feel disrespected. When men don't take time to caress their wives and understand and try to demonstrate that, then women don't feel loved. What am I? I'm just a tool that you use, to put it politely. You see, in intimacy, you have to understand her needs. And men, you have to understand his needs. You have to remove the world's portrayal of sex and what people do in the privacy of their bedrooms. And you have to learn what she enjoys. You have to learn what he enjoys. But you also have to respect the boundaries that each one puts on that. And respect that. And you know, I think that that when we understand those things, when we are able to talk, I don't want to see hands, but how many of you have actually sat down and talked about having sex, not just whether you will or not, but what's enjoyable and what's not? You know, it's not an easy thing, is it? I will freely admit that it's not an easy thing. But it would actually, I think, open up our eyes and open up our understanding to the needs of our partner and our mate in that situation. All right, so, and then the number one issue obviously is money. And it's going to get us out of here right on time. I know that I'm the only person standing between you lunch, but let me talk about money. Because money is number one overall stressor, number one issue in many relationships, right? So, get a couple verses here just to chat about here, just to talk about. The first one is, as you can see, 1 Timothy 6:10, "For the love of money is a root of all evil, which while some coveted after they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." Now, the love of money, the lusting of more money, more, right? Money in and of itself is not evil. It's an inanimate object, right? It's a piece of paper, or it's a bank account, or whatever it is, a coin, whatever, however it's, you know, it's the love and the desire of it that the Bible warns us about. It says in Romans 13:8, "Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law." So, and it says, "Moreover, it's required of stewards that a man be found faithful." What it's talking about in all these verses here is that what do we desire? Where do we put our focus? What do we put first? And so, let's talk about a couple of stressors, right? How many of you think women spend more money than men? How many of you think men spend more money than women? Why is that?
Hunting's not cheap.
What's that?
Hunting is not cheap.
Hunting is not, you know, but you're right.
Cars are not cheap either.
You're right on target, though. You're absolutely right on target. My wife would come to me and she'd say, "I need to buy a new spatula," and I never said not to go buy one. I mean, I remember this so vividly. She was sitting there stirring soup in a pot, and the spatula piece fell off the handle. And I said, "Could you please go buy a new spatula?" She goes, "No, I could put it back, but I can still use it." I'm like, "It's $1.25 or whatever it was." Men's toys tend to be more expensive than women's stuff. So I mean, excluding food, right? So what do? We buy trucks, and we buy fishing poles, and you know, we're not buying $20 fishing poles.
Parts to fix said truck. And then when you get the truck, you have to buy a lift for it because you can't leave it the way it was. That just doesn't look good. And then you need
Yep.
She gets it. She gets it.
You can be a man.
ARs, you know, that whole thing.
Yeah. So women, what do you buy that men get upset about? Clothes. Makeup. Hey, baby, you look beautiful. You don't need that makeup.
Go get your hair done. Why did you do that? You looked fine before.
You know, we may not buy as often, but when we do buy, it's pretty expensive, right? We've had that same conversation. So how do you resolve it? I mean, that's really the issue, right? How do you resolve? We know there's an issue with money. We know that money, look, and there are some things that, by the way, women tend to look more long-term than men do with respect to money. So, and I'll just share this with you. My wife and I have had this reoccurring, and it has been a conversation because we're exchanging information. We've had this reoccurring discussion lately about whether we should go and buy property. I look at it and say, I've got 15 years. That's a long time to work before I even think about retiring. My wife says, you've only got 15 years. See the difference? She's thinking long term. She's thinking, and I love her for this, by the way, because it has truly reined me in. She has said, you know, we've got 15 years, and where do we want to be in 15 years? I'm thinking, I got 15 years. I got a lot of time to think about this. She's like, no, we got it, because it's planning. It's thinking about what are our goals in 15 years? Now, obviously those goals involve church. That's not the question, right? But will we have enough money to retire on so that we can still enjoy, not the same, we're never going to have the same lifestyle when you retire, but yeah, our finances are going to change, but we'll be able to, spend time with the grandchildren, take them to do fun things like that. She's thinking long term. I'm thinking short term, 5 years. I want to get her a house because I know there are some things she's been frustrated with. See, my motivation is not wrong. My motivation, in part, at least 50% of that motivation is to try to give her something that I think that she deserves and she would love. But we have to continuously have this communication because there's a balance there, right? So here's some practical ideas for money. And first, did I turn it off? I did turn it off. All right. First of all, you need to make a plan. You need to sit down. Now, I won't say that my wife and I, about 7 years ago, I forget, she came up to me and she goes, I have a book for you to read. I'm like, okay, I'll read it. And the author of the book was Dave Ramsey. Anybody ever heard of him? All right, whether you agree with him or not, and I didn't agree with every point, right? Obviously I don't, because I have a house payment and I have a car payment, and he says those things are bad, right? That's fine. The premise of the book was right, though. And the premise of the book is live within your means. Don't spend money that you don't have, right? We did that early on in our marriage. We spent more money than we had. It took us a long time to get out of that hole. I will tell you, the craziest trip I ever took, and we actually had money to pay for it. But when we were living in Idaho, we flew to Disney World with our kids. Now, the air flight and the hotels were covered because of work. I had saved up my points and things like that. But man, you go to Disney World and you just start throwing down that credit card, right? And pretty soon you get home and it's like, there's no way that we spent $2,500 in 4 days at Disneyland or Disney World. Well, yeah, because those hamburgers are $18 a piece, right? You have to sit down and you have to set a goal. What are your short-term and your long-term goals, right? So when my wife handed me this book, she said, what are our short-term goals? And we sat down and we listed them out. And we said, what are our long-term goals? And we actually sat down and listed those out. And while we don't, we're not so rigid that it causes tension, we still, I think even subconsciously, adhere in large part to that plan that we put together. So you have to do an honest assessment of where you are currently, assets and liabilities. The worst thing that we can do with money and finances is to bet on future expectations. So I will tell you a story on myself, and it didn't necessarily impact me financially, but it did impact me in emotionally. When I was in Idaho, I was, as most of you know, I've been in the technology industry for 20 plus years, 26 years. I've sold phone systems, so I go into a business and I understand what their needs are from my phone perspective. And you know, I've sold $30 million contracts, I've sold $10,000 contracts. It's been all over the place, right? So the school district where my kids went to school, I knew the purchasing agent very well. He says, we're going out to bid. I said, great. I'd already sold him a few things, and he said, we're going out to bid. Can you help me write their request for proposal? We call it an RFP. Can you help me write it? What does that do? It gives me complete insight into what their needs are and how to bid this thing and how to build it. And I went in there and I said, absolutely. And we sat down, we got all done. We did spend a couple of weeks on it. I went back to my office, and now I have this RFP, and I sat down and I put it was 25 schools. It's a big deal. Put it all together, and I said to my wife, I said, man, I bet you I walk away with $30,000 in commission. It's not uncommon in this industry. I mean, most of my peers in sales today make, you know, if they're good, they can make easily $1 million. I'm not in sales anymore. I haven't been in a long time. And that's in big cities, by the way, not in Roseburg. Not enough people. You'd have to sell phones to cows to make that much money. But I thought, you know, this is back in the late 90s, and I'm thinking I'm gonna walk away with $30,000 in commissions. This is gonna be great. We're gonna buy a new truck, and we're gonna do this and that, and we're all set. Submitted my bid, felt confident, and he calls me up and says, Tom, I got bad news. So what's the bad news? He says, you didn't win. I said, what do you mean I didn't win? I wrote it. How do you mean I didn't win? He said, Lucent Technologies at the time came in and undercut your price. And this is a strictly price deal. Well, I know that Lucent Technologies is the high price leader in the market. What I didn't realize, and 6 months later I was working for Lucent Technologies, so then I found out they bought the business. They took a loss to win the business. I could not have protected myself. But what's the point of the story? The point of the story is you have to be honest to where you're at now, not where you expect to be in 5 years, because you don't know what's going to happen in 5 years. Also, but don't let that paralyze you. Now, I sit down and I say, okay, I make $1.25 today, right? I make $1.25, and the next year I'm going to make another $1.25. I anticipate I'm going to continue to make that. I can't perceive layoffs and things like that. I mean, there are going to be decisions, things that happen that we cannot anticipate. So guess what? We have to go back up and make a new plan when those happen, right? So, but in your current day-to-day, you need to develop a budget and a financial plan to determine how to spend and how much you want to save. I think it's important that you pay yourself. So in financial, I look at it this way. We want to give money to, we have bills to pay, we got to do all that, we've got to eat, we want to pay ourselves. I think you also want to tithe, and that's part of that budgeting process, tithing to the Lord, paying your bills, and then saving. Probably the biggest thing that I didn't do when I was younger was understand the saving part. I understood paying bills. I understood tithing. It was never a question. What I didn't understand is that I needed to ensure that I saved money as well. So what did we do because of that? We lived paycheck to paycheck, and we spent what we made. And that's the danger in it, because what that does is it doesn't give us any type of cushion when things go bad. And that's the danger part. I mean, so, and then that brings us to the last point here, and that is we need to assess and adjust, right? Schedule a time. There's a scheduling thing again. Schedule a time to renew and adjust, whether it be monthly or annually. take time to talk to your significant other, your husband or your wife, about budgets. Now, for those of you that are single, you're saying, well, I don't have anybody to talk to, but you know this principle still works the same way. Whether you're married or not, you still have financial issues and needs and assessments, and I have seen just as many single people get into trouble with money as I have with married couples. It just so happens that if you're married, you've got someone else who feels equal ownership with that money. And by the way, I am not a fan of his and hers. It should be ours. It should be ours. If you want to cause contention, his and hers. I've seen it where people say, okay, I'll pay this bill, you pay that bill, and all of a sudden they didn't pay that bill. And it's like, what do you mean you didn't pay that bill? Ours. You're one flesh. One flesh. All right. Any questions?